Welcome, my name's Simon, and this is Ordinary Filmmaker. On October the 24th, Canon announced the development of the 1DX Mark III. Not only was this an announcement of the development, it was an extensive list of the capabilities that the new camera would have. Apparently, significantly improving many capabilities from information processing, video capture, photo, throughput, all the way to autofocus. So why do I care? This is an announcement for the 1DX Mark III. I don't have funding for this camera. It starts at $6,000. Well, that's being conservative. It might start as high as $7,000, and that's without a lens. Add an easy $1,000 to $2,000 there, and $1,000 for CF Express cards. What are we at? $10,000? This camera is not for the ordinary filmmaker. It's not for ordinary average moms, dads, and students that are trying to capture life as it happens. So why do I care? Well, it is their flagship camera. So if this camera is mediocre at best, the children that it spawns, like the 5D Mark V, EOS RP Mark II, or the EOS R Mark II, or even the Pro version, they're going to be mediocre at very best. However, a 1DX Mark III that is full of shock and awe with innovative new features will create excitement because, well, sure, Canon's going to use its cripple hammer to soften those capabilities. They're going to be a lot better than what we've had in previous models. Makes me really excited to see what the 5D Mark V will do. Or the next EOS R. So let's review these capabilities, and then I'll make some predictions as to what Canon's going to release in 2020. Then we can make informed decisions on whether to keep our 70D, 80D, move to the 90D EOS R, or wait a few more months to really see what's going to come out. Now, when I talked to Canon a couple of weeks ago about the firmware update to add 24 frames per second back, one thing the guy said to me at the end was, stay tuned, I think you're going to see a lot of exciting news. I thought it was kind of odd that he would say that, but I'm sensing that Canon's changing here. Bringing back 24 frames per second to about 4 or 5 cameras, announcing the development of their flagship camera, many months before it's due to deploy. Let's get into those features and specifications and let's see what capabilities will improve. Okay, this is the thing that really stunned me, and I was actually quite speechless. Sure, 4K 60, a lot of cameras have it, but to be able to produce 4K 60, 10-bit, 422 internal, as well as being raw, and offering C-Log? The closest competition to that would be the Panasonic S1H. The only question here is, will there be a crop? And what will it be, if anything? Make no mistake, this camera is going to produce an awful lot of detail and terrific color accuracy. Yeah, I'm still partly speechless here. I mean, we're essentially taking the video features in the Canon C200, close to $10,000? Let's say $10,000 after you've kitted out, a $10,000 camera. The internal architecture has also dramatically changed here. Now, the camera doesn't look any different on the outside. We've seen pictures, and the only difference is right at the bottom there where it says Mark II, it now says Mark III. Haven't even changed the font. But inside, we get a brand new CMOS sensor, a new autofocus sensor, and there's a lot going on in autofocus I'll talk about shortly, and a brand new digic processor. This is a redesign of the architecture inside and the hardware, which is going to also positively improve on the software and the capabilities that will be delivered. When Canon came out with dual pixel autofocus in 2013 in the Canon 70D, it blew a lot of people away. For a change, you could actually track your subject without having to worry about pulling autofocus. it was trustworthy, it was reliable, it was accurate. Now, Canon has tweaked it with each camera that's come out, and in this 1DX Mark III, autofocus has been tweaked again, but in some major ways. The autofocus sensor has 28 times the resolution of its predecessor. We get improved coverage, but Canon's added something called deep learning autofocus. I don't know what it means, and Canon's not telling us a whole lot. David Perry, Canon's UK product intelligence specialist, whatever that means, sounds like machine learning or artificial intelligence, was quoted as saying, "This is an autofocus system we haven't seen before. It's something very new, very different." Now, when Canon released that dual pixel autofocus in 2013, as I just mentioned, it was seen as revolutionary. It was seen as very, very innovative, and it certainly made their consumer cameras a whole lot easier to use. But we've also seen dual pixel autofocus move up into the cinema line of cameras. So if this is another major innovative step in terms of how fast it is, how it's able to lock on various different types of subjects, I don't know. They're not telling us, but I'm kind of excited to find out what this is. Canon certainly seems to be excited. The 1DX is primarily aimed at sports photographers, anybody that needs to capture fast-moving action, a photographer that needs to capture a minimum of 10 frames a second. The Mark III is capable of capturing 16 frames a second through the viewfinder and 20 frames a second through live view. Canon has also done away with JPEG in favor of HEIF. JPEG is an 8-bit codec, whereas HEIF is 10 bits, giving us a lot more detail and more information. The Mark III is also capable of capturing 5 times more raw photos in burst mode. Both card slots are now CF Express. These cards are very expensive, but they're capable of speeds up to 1,500 megabytes a second. I want to read a couple of quotes from Canon Senior Technical Specialist Drew McCullum. The 1DX Mark III will do focus tracking and exposure at 20 frames a second, either way, mechanical or electronic shutter, with the mirror locked up. He further went on to say, "We've heard that message out there from other manufacturers saying it's not possible, and we've been doing it. It's quite possible, and here we are blowing out the numbers again." Sounds like Canon's back. Sounds like they're boasting. Sounds like they're innovating. Sounds exciting. So when will the 1DX Mark III be coming out? Initially, rumors hinted at the first quarter of 2020. However, based on the company financials that indicate a flagship camera is coming out in January, we can deduce that this is the Canon 1DX Mark III, most likely due at the end of January. What other cameras can we deduce are coming out in 2020? We can also deduce that Canon is going to release the EOS R Pro. Essentially, it's going to have the same features as the 1DX Mark III, but a mirrorless version. So it will have 4K 60 frames a second, RAW, C-Log, and it'll shoot video in 10-bit 422 internal, 120 frames per second slow motion in 1080p, and capable of capturing 20 frames per second photo in live view. We also expect it to have the same autofocus system. It's also a pretty safe bet that the Canon 5D Mark V will come out and replace the 5D Mark IV. We expect Canon to reduce the capability of what's available in the 1DX Mark III for the 5D Mark V, and the first thing we expect Canon to tackle is 4K, limiting it to 4K 30, and most likely removing RAW as an option. However, we expect Canon to add C-Log at no additional cost. We expect it to be able to record in 10-bit 422 internal, record 120 frames per second, this time in 1080p, and be capable of 10 frames per second through the viewfinder and 14 frames per second. Most likely it's going to top out at 10. We also expect it to have the same autofocus system that's in the Mark III. Another likely release is the Canon EOS R Mark II. Another camera we expect to come out in 2020 is the EOS R Mark II. It'll definitely have more detail in 4K than the Mark I. We expect the 4K 30 frames per second. We expect C-Log, 8-bit 420 internal, 120 frames per second in 1080p, 10 frames per second autofocus compared to the 2 to 3 that you're realistically going to get out of it now. And of course, the same autofocus system that's in the Canon 1DX Mark III. Now, this and the 5D we're expecting in the fourth quarter of 2020, but that could bleed over into the first quarter. So, how does the Canon 1DX Mark III line up with the competition? Panasonic currently has the S1H out. It shoots 6K, but the autofocus isn't good for anything other than when you're going to put the camera in manual focus, such as studio work or event-based. The A9 II, well, it's a great camera, but I wouldn't be picking that for video. I would pick the A7S III. Well, we don't know when the A7S III is coming out, but that would be my bet for the best video camera from Sony. And Leica's SL2 is also going to be using contrast detect, where you need continuous live autofocus that you could trust. Canon 1DX Mark III would be better. But it's also a very heavy camera. It's about 3 pounds or 1.4 kilograms. And it's a pretty hefty body. So you can run and gun with it. Peter McKinnon does it all the time. It's his favorite camera. But for the ordinary filmmaker, none of these cameras are going to work very well for you, again, unless you're in studio work, and then you're not an ordinary filmmaker. This is your lifeblood. And again, until we actually get these cameras in the studio and test them out, they're just words. They're announcements of development. There's no guarantee that capabilities mentioned on those sheets in that news release are actually going to make it through to the final product. So we'll have to wait. And I'm excited to see the results. I hope you found this video informative. If you like the video, please click like and subscribe. We'll see you soon. Take care.